This is a bit of a longer form here that I'm going to be sharing with you. This is an autobiographical story of some things that I actually went through. I've never told this in public before, ever, and so I'm pretty nervous. So bear with me as I stumble along through it, okay?
You got this!
So it starts a little something like this. If you're a cop, I'll cut your fucking throat from ear to ear. And these were among the final words spoken to me as I walked in the woods alone with a drug-addled heroin addict trying to convince him to sell me dope. On my final, what was my 22nd and final outing as a grudging, very reluctant, confidential informant for a small police department in a Northern California city. So I tried to remain calm and hide my panic at that point, but the truth is I was gripping in wires and surveillance equipment. In my left hand, I had a key fob, which wasn't a key fob. It looked like an alarm for a Civic, Honda Civic. But it's actually a digital spy camera. It could record up to 6 hours of high-definition, widescreen, full-color video. And in my right hand, I had a cell phone. It wasn't really a cell phone. It was a microphone and a transmitter, which would transmit, was transmitting in real time to my police handlers who were out there somewhere. And now, normally I would be surrounded at a distance by a traveling armada of undercover cars and plainclothes policemen who would sort of leapfrog one another and stay out of sight as they would observe me and try to keep me safe. And the protocol was that if anything was to go down, if somebody was going to jack me for dope or if something like that was going to happen, jack me, for my money, then all I needed to do was just say, I wish my brothers were here. If I said, I wish my brothers were here, that was code for them to come in, swoop in, and save me, right? But at this point, I was way too far out of pocket. There was no help for me. I'd wandered into the woods with this guy out of desperation to try to get one last deal so that I could stop doing it. And so they would never find me in time. So instead, here I stood alone in the sticks with this strung-out golem eyeing me like a twitchy, suspicious freak, and with a knife in his hand, telling me he's going to stab me in the neck if I made one wrong move. But the truth is, deep down inside me, there was a part of me that didn't care because I felt like I deserved it. Because I was a fucking snitch, right? I was a snitch. I felt like I was worthless because of that. So you might ask yourself, how did I find myself in a situation like that, right? And that's a fair question. The seeds had actually been sown 15 years earlier in a moment of weakness, which led to a careless choice shortly after my father had died. And my father was my best friend. I'm a third-generation only child on my paternal line. I was a naturally shy kid, introverted, very creative. My dad was one of the only human beings who ever fully understood me. And so he was a unique man. He was gentle, intelligent, musical, artistic. He was a man of integrity. He treated everyone he met with kindness and respect. And early on, he saw in me my natural creativity and encouraged it in me. And one of my earliest memories is actually sitting on his lap at about 5 years old as he encouraged me to describe this made-up alien landscape as he drew it in colored pencils. My mind was blown because it was coming to life right in front of me. And it was a collaboration between my creativity and his artistic hand. So, I was an odd kid. I never really fit in. As a kid, I had buck teeth, red hair, bright freckles. People used to call me Howdy Doody, right? It was a fun time as a kid. So, but my dad always believed in me, and he encouraged me. He knew I could sing. He would hear me singing in the bedroom at night, and he encouraged me to try out for choir as a kid, and so I did. And that changed everything in my life. It turns out I was talented, apparently. And so pretty soon I was getting every lead in various musicals and things like that around town. And it led to a social life and people starting to embrace me. I became a choir nerd, basically, And as I came into high school, I put on some makeup. It was the 80s. Put on some makeup and some lipstick, became cool, And started experimenting with composing music. And pretty soon all my best friends were musicians. I formed a band. The band developed a pretty big following. And as I careened into college years, we all decided to move to San Francisco, which we did. We moved to San Francisco, started getting a buzz around the band that we had formed. My dad was pumped. He helped us move at the time. We were developing a pretty big San Francisco buzz. We had management companies starting to chomp at the bid. We were stoked. We were on our way up. Everything was right with the world, and that's when I got the phone call. That's when I got the call from my mom, and she was on the other end, and her voice was shaky, and she told me, Matt, your dad is dying of cancer. And everything fell out from underneath me. It was aggressive, it was terminal, I was crushed, I was devastated. I dropped everything in the Bay Area and moved back home to help take care of my dad. Just in time to see him wither away, piece by piece, into nothing, to see his mind fog up and his body shrivel. And I didn't know how to handle that. I was petrified. I was petrified of losing him, and I was too scared to talk to him about it, because if I talked to him about it, it would become real, and I wasn't ready for that. So my whole life changed one night as I was struggling with all this, when I walked out into the living room where a friend of mine was spending the night on the couch, just in time to see him smoking methamphetamine off of tin foil. And I'd already seen all my friends go through that and go to rehab. I was like, that's never going to be for me. But at the time, wrong night, vulnerable feeling, made a bad decision, and I took a hit. It was no big deal. I was like, this is no big deal. And the only thing that really happened is all of a sudden I'm having the most interesting conversation I've ever had in my life. But other than that, it's no really big deal, right? You know? And so I tried to sell that lie to myself to feel better. It made me feel better as my dad was dying. It allowed me to live in a nice little bubble of denial. But deep down inside, I knew I was blowing it. I knew that I was hooked, and I knew that it was too late. So my dad died a few months later. He was 54 years old when he died, and he died right in front of me. And I became an empty shell at that point. I let my dad down, and I knew it. He died ashamed and scared for his son, I presumed. And so at that point, from that point forward, I gave up on everything. I gave up on music, I gave up on life, I gave up on myself. I spent the next 15 years as a dope fiend. Years passed, I moved away. I became a functional addict eventually, meaning that I could hold a job. The thing about being a functional addict is that everything's great as long as everything's great, but when things go sideways, your whole life falls apart. And that's pretty much what happened. I lost the job that I had at the time. I ended up facing a 60-day eviction notice. I didn't have any prospects on the road, and plus I had a habit which was bigger than ever. And homelessness was what was facing me when my dealer came through with a great deal for me. Turns out his boss, we'll call him El Mano for the purpose of this little story, was a regional player in the dope scene. And he needed help delivering product to his distributors and his dealers. Now, I never met the guy in person. He was always just a voice on the phone, but I later discovered there was reason for that. That's because he was actually still living and conducting business from his sprawling ranch home in a remote part of Mexico, where he dealt with everything and was protected from the long arm of U.S. justice by the Zeta cartel. That was fun to find out later on. So, you know, I should have said no, but I was desperate and on the verge of homelessness. So I called him up to see what he had to say. And he said, it's no problem, it's gonna be simple. All you're gonna do is you're gonna see my stash house manager on a weekly basis. He's gonna give you a few pounds of crystal meth and heroin every week and a burner phone. You're gonna wait for a phone call. You're gonna take that phone call. I'm gonna tell you where to go, who to meet, how much to give him, how much money to take. You're gonna lather, rinse, repeat every week. Just do the same thing. And in exchange for that, I'm going to give you a salary. A nice, handsome salary that's going to pay all my bills and leave me with some money left over. And best of all, free dope. I'm going to get free dope every week out of it, right? So it was kind of it was a deal that I couldn't really turn down. I didn't know what else to do. So my significant other, who's remained with me through better and worse, sitting right there. She begged me not to do it. She looked at me with that look and just like, you're a fucking idiot. What are you thinking? What are you gonna do? But I felt like I had no choice, and so I said yes. And from there it was off to the races. It was a blur of phone calls and customers, unknown danger, meeting perfect strangers in dark alleys, all hours, day and night, in a state of perpetual paranoia. I did it for about 3 months. That was all the time that I did it. I fucking hated it. I was really bad at it. I was constantly stressed out. The phone was always ringing day and night. I was always on the go. Worst of all, I would lose product on a regular basis. And that stressed me out because drug distributors generally don't like you losing the product. And he probably thought that I was stealing it. The truth is I wasn't. I would just get so caught up running around trying to deliver stuff to people that I would put this one in a cup and this one in a chip bag, and then I'd get the cup over here to meet this guy, then I had another phone call, and I forgot about the chip bag, and there it went, right? So I was not good at it. In his defense, or if there is such a thing for him, as far as mob bosses go, he was downright reasonable. All he would do would just deduct it from my pay and tell me not to be an idiot. Tell me to keep my shit together, right? No threats of broken kneecaps, wasn't gonna kill my dog, anything like that. Just, you get paid less this time, right? That's right, which would have been Freddie. So, over time, I started to develop a familiarity with my regular customers. I was careful. I was one of 2 regional couriers. We worked together to cover the metropolitan area. We'll call the other guy that I worked with Bob. And we worked well together. We would pack dope and package it for sale at my house. It sort of became the place where we would meet and divvy everything up. He was a good guy. He was a soft-spoken, intelligent guy. He just happened to have a heroin habit that he needed to feed, and cover. So we worked well together. We covered each other if there were scheduling conflicts. So if I had an appointment or something, he would cover my delivery. If he had something going on, I would cover his. And we developed a friendship, and we acted as a team. But such a line of work is not without its risks, obviously. And that became very real one particular day. Bob and I were chilling at my pad smoking a nice sweet bowl of meth because, hey, it's time to relax. And that's when I got the phone call from El Mano. And he wanted me to deliver a half ounce of our better crystal meth to a customer whose name I'd never heard before. And it needed to be there in like 20 minutes. Well, I couldn't do that because I had a food stamp appointment. I needed to eat. So Bob said that he would cover it for me. He would deliver it for me. The first sign that I had that things had gone wrong were the distant sirens I heard, and then more sirens, and then more sirens. I called Bob, he wouldn't answer. I called El Mano, he had no clue what was going on. And I finally rode down after the appointment to the meeting spot, and cops were everywhere. Cops were everywhere, and there was a body underneath a blanket. And it turns out that that customer that Bob went to meet actually had a strung-out gangbanger friend who he brought with him, who, as soon as the exchange was made, shot the customer straight in the chest, killing him to rip the dope off from him. And Bob was frozen. It all happened right in front of him. And he figured he was next because he's just seen somebody kill someone. The guy didn't bother. For whatever reason, he just took off. He had the dope. He was freaked out. I don't know. He left. And, that was supposed to be me. That was supposed to be me. And that shook me up. Bob was never the same. That ate him up. His heroin habit got worse, and pretty soon he disappeared. Now, that should have woken me up, but it didn't. I felt like I was on a fast treadmill with no way to get off. I didn't know how to get out. I was going to lose everything I had if I got out, and I didn't know what else to do. Well, I was forced out eventually, and the way that went down is that one day when I was leaving the stash house after re-upping on about, 3 or 4 pounds of crystal meth and heroin, I was on my bicycle after doing that, riding down the road, and I couldn't help but notice this gold car that was sort of trailing me, and it just didn't look right. So I got a bad feeling about that. I turned off, peeled off through in the opposite direction, away from him, through a park. I figured I was in the clear. I came out of that park, turned the corner just in time to see a black, unmarked cop car blocking the road as if they were waiting for me. Like they knew where I was going to be. So they found those 2 or 3 pounds of crystal meth and heroin on me. I hadn't even had time to hide it or anything. And I went to jail. And I figured I was fucked. I figured I was on my way to state prison. So imagine my surprise when I go in front of the judge 3 days later during my arraignment, and I have the DA say, "Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges." My public attorney says, "Yep, sounds good to me." Gavel comes down. I'm looking around going, when are we getting to me? Because you're talking about somebody else, right? Because shit was in my pocket. It's not like it was even, I couldn't figure it out. My attorney, public defender just said, "Look, just count your blessings and live your life." So I took it, I figured as it was my second chance from God, basically, and that it was my chance to make some changes. So I took it on the chin. I lost the apartment. I moved away. I actually quit. That's another thing I never thought would be possible. It was downright reasonable mobster. He allowed me to quit. Okay. And I took it on the chin. I had to move back to my parents' house for a year, to my mom's house. And I looked for a job throughout that year. Spent a whole year looking, finally found a job, got my groove back, preparing to move out. Everything was looking great. I'm at work when I get the phone call, the second life-changing phone call that I would ever get. And again, it was my mother. And again, her voice was shaking as she told me that, Matt, the DEA, the FBI, and a SWAT team have surrounded the house. They're looking for you. And I was in shock. I couldn't figure it out because, I was living righteously. I've been living righteously for the past year. Next thing you know, I'm getting calls from the cops. They're saying, turn yourself in. I'm saying, what's this about? They won't tell me. They say, you just need to turn yourself in. So I'm in a panic. I leave work in a panic. I drive around. Finally, I find and secure a private attorney because I don't know what's going on. I'm getting inklings now that this is something bigger than a local charge. And so I ended up being on the run for 3 days. And I stayed in hotels and motels. I couldn't get any information. My attorney couldn't get any information. Eventually, on that third day, I started to convince myself this was all a mistake and that I could go back home. And so I went home. And just as I got home, I got the call from my attorney telling me what was going on. And that's when my world really collapsed. It turns out that those 3 months I was doing that activity were smack dab in the middle of a federal sting investigation. And so I was now one of 24 co-defendants facing a 54-count federal RICO indictment. 3 of those counts were mine, 1 small weight charge, which carried 5 to life with it mandatory minimum, 2 large weight charges, each carrying 10 to life mandatory minimum. The federal system is 85% time. It's not like state prison where you can do 50% time. So when you get sentenced to 10 years, you're doing 8.5. So, and that was the best I could expect, right? And the worst would be much longer and much more. I was to surrender, my attorney told me, to the U.S. Marshals in the morning. I was devastated. I was on the verge of losing everything in my life that I loved most, the people that I loved most, everything. So very few recovering addicts have the privilege of knowing the last time that they're going to do dope before they do it or as they are doing it. I was blessed with that honor. On September 15th, 2011 at 5:30 in the morning, I did the last line of crystal meth that I would ever do. And I did it as I sat in the bed preparing to turn myself into the U.S. Marshals, as I sat there holding my significant other who for some reason still loved me. And I even said it to myself aloud, this is the last time I ever do this. And I knew that whatever happened, nothing was going to be the same. And I was right. In the morning, the U.S. Marshals came to pick me up, take me to the federal detention facility to await my arraignment. The 2 Yahoo Marshals that picked me up, they were fun guys. They like to have fun, undercover guys. They like to have fun and tell jokes and about me at my expense because it was neat. And so, however, through that experience, I actually learned one very significant little factor. When one of the Yahoo U.S. Marshals turned to me and said, it's kind of funny how they dropped all those charges against you last year, huh? That's when it dawned on me. Oh, that's because there were superseding federal charges. They made the local authorities drop those charges. So I went and I spent a few days, about a week, in the federal detention facility. Thankfully, God bless my mother, she put up her house so that I could get bail, and that bail bought me time to change my life. And I didn't know where to go, I didn't know what to do. I didn't like 12-step programs, but I knew I needed help. And so I remembered a man with a crazy beard and white hair, a scraggling kind of guy, sort of a hippie weirdo guy, who used to be my landlord. And he, I knew that he was involved with this men's organization. And so I went to him immediately, and he took me under his wing, introduced me to the men, and slowly but surely they taught me to live by a code, a 15-point code of honor. Slowly I relearned what integrity meant. Slowly my brain cleared. I started learning about addiction and brain chemistry and what had been going on with my brain and why I'd acted the way I had. I started going to school to become a drug and alcohol counselor. And then 18 months into my pretrial experience, the last bomb dropped. The U.S. Attorney knew that I was the weak link, right? I'd never been to prison, and that's why they kept that small weight charge in there, so that they could dismiss the large weight charges if I would cooperate. And so the deal was testify, and we'll dismiss the large weight charges. That still left me with 5 to life, though. The only way I was getting rid of that. The system works? I don't know about all that. Well, I don't know about all that, but at the same time, that was the deal. A roll on the people ahead of me, which, by the way, let me remind you, are connected to the Zeta cartel. Just want to throw that out there. And do that, or, you know, just take it on the chin. Spend 10, 15, 20 years in prison. And then if I didn't want to do 5 to 10 years, basically, in prison, I needed to do more. I need to go out and be a confidential informant. Now, for those who like to front and say, man, that's a bitch move, I would never do that, fucking snitch-ass bitch, blah, 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 I just would like to invite you to sit in front of a U.S. Attorney facing 10 to life in the federal penitentiary, and then get back to me with your opinion about what the fuck you would do. All right? So I started acting as a CI, and I went all over. I would buy undercover. I was wired the whole time. I would do the buy. I would do about a week's worth of buys, and then later on the cops, I would identify them, and then the cops would come in and swoop them up when I wasn't around. And I did this for a good long while. I had to actually testify in court a couple of times, and I was snitching and I was ruining lives. And I was on a pretrial for another 2 years. I was on it for a total of 3.5 years before I ever even got to see the judge. And I began coming apart. I was living like a schizophrenic person. I was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I would spend half my day indulging old addict behaviors, becoming an addict. I'd smoke 3 cigarettes quickly so I could look sickly. And I would be indulging these addict behaviors and being an addict so I could do this despicable work. And then the next half of the day, I would leave there and go immediately to college, where I was learning to help the very same addicts I was throwing under the bus. And I couldn't reconcile it. But everything changed the day that I found music again. And for years I thought that it was too late. I thought I'd blown my voice out, my mind out, my soul out. But the men in the organization were teaching me the importance of honoring my father, honoring his wishes, of being the man that I wanted to be, becoming the man I wanted to be. They encouraged me to go for it again, to try out for something. Now, I'd always loved jazz music. I never thought I could do it. I always thought it was too technical. And the men said, that's exactly why you need to try out for jazz music, right? And so I did that. I tried out and I made it. And then the first time I tried scatting, which is something that always petrified me, I found out I was really good at that. And I was 43 years old, and I'd finally rediscovered my bliss and found that I could excel in life. And as I met my fellow musicians, I was rejuvenated, I was filled with life. I'd finally found my people, I'd reclaimed my purpose. And that's when I decided I was done. I was no longer going to be a snitch. I needed to be able to look myself in the mirror again. Whatever might happen, whatever the consequences were, I could not do this anymore. But I still knew that I was dancing with the devil, and I needed to extract myself carefully. I needed to be smart, and so the only chance that I could get out would be to go out on a high note with one last sacrificial lamb led to the slaughter for the man to consume and throw in his cold and empty system. So that's how I found myself here in the sticks with Gollum that day, because that was the day I was planning on quitting, but I'd gotten no bites all day. Nobody was doing anything. Nobody would take the bait. So I needed to be done, so I took the long shot when in the evening I finally met the only person who was willing to take the bait. So there I am in the woods with him and a knife and threatening my life while I'm dripping in surveillance equipment. And somehow I managed to act my way out of that situation in that moment. I like to thank all of the acting experiences I got as a kid in those musicals as being the thing that allowed me to act so well that he didn't stab me in the neck. But I extracted myself from that situation, and I immediately went to my cop handlers and told them, I'm done, I quit, I resign right now. And I walked away that day, and I never looked back. So by the time I was sentenced, I was unrecognizable from the dope fiend I had been. I'd won, by that time, it had been 3.5 years on pretrial. I'd won the Presidential Volunteer Service Award for my work with food banks. I'd won a Congressional Certificate of Recognition for my record-breaking food drives. I was almost done with school to become a drug and alcohol counselor. The judge said he'd never seen a more drastic transformation in somebody than he'd seen in me. Ultimately, I did 14 months in federal prison, but I made that time count. And now here I am, 6 years clean from dope. Now I spend my days reaching back and helping fellow addicts as a professional IoT counselor. My little family is still intact, and best of all, I gig with bands and I write music again. So the most important things that I learned through these experiences, and I live my life by these, and if there's one thing, if you don't remember anything else that I've said tonight, just remember these things. The only difference between triumph and tragedy is the context you create around it. You always have the power to change the worst things that happen in your life into the best things that happen in your life. It's a matter of context and action. And those lessons have led me finally to become the man that I know my father would be proud of. Thank you.